Hello, everybody, and welcome. Hi, Will. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Alex. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Chapter 7 of the Full Stack GraphQL Book Club. So we are, well into the final stretches of the book. Chapter 7 is what we do this week. So I'm looking forward to this. Its subtitle, I guess, is Adding Authorization and Authentication. So a little bit more, I guess, technical, and that's more like the boring baseline stuff you need to do, but that's important as well. How did Emil say at the Graph Connect last year? Where I say, okay, sometimes you have to focus on the boring things because the boring things that are not as exciting are important for product to run and to make sense for users. So sometimes it's the boring stuff you have to do, or it's maybe it sounds boring, but maybe it isn't. So I'm excited to hear about this today. So let's see where this leads. As always, this is obviously supposed to be interactive. So if you have any questions, any comments, any feedback on the book, the sessions, the GraphQL in general, then please don't hesitate to use the chat function and let us know what you think. And if you're watching this on either YouTube or Twitch live right now, we are giving away yet another signed copy of the book. So up until basically from now until we do the exercises, so usually around at the halftime in like 25 or so minutes, maybe a little bit earlier. But I'll remind you again, if you watch it there on YouTube or Twitch, type !Raffle in chat and you get a ticket for the book. And before we do the exercises, we will pick a winner at random, and he or she will get a copy signed by Will, and you can even dedicate it to somebody you like, or it's going to yourself. No problem there. So if you want the book, if you want to win, then type in !Raffle. Unfortunately, like I said, it only works on YouTube or Twitch. But if you're watching this somewhere else and you're wondering, hey, where do I need to go to watch this on the other channels, then it's very easy. It's twitch.tv/neo4j or it's youtube.com/neo4j. And then you see the live streams there. So it's not time critical, so you don't have to do it immediately. So you have some minutes time, so don't worry about it. But yeah, go to YouTube or Twitch and then type in !Raffle. I think I said !Raffle too many times now, so let's dive in. And chapter 7. Let's go.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it. Well, despite Alex referring to authorization as the boring stuff, I think this chapter is actually really exciting. There's a lot of stuff going on in chapter 7. I think it's the longest chapter in the book, and there's a few reasons for that. I think one is that authorization and authentication spans like the full stack of our application. We need to make sure that we're handling authentication authorization at the client application level, so in our React application, and then also in the API level. We want to make sure that the GraphQL API that we're exposing follows the authorization rules that make sense for our application. So in this chapter, as a reminder, in the book, we're building up a full stack business reviews application. So being able to search for businesses, submit reviews, that sort of thing. And some of the authorization rules that might be relevant for us are things like, well, only the currently authenticated user should be able to see their information. So maybe I shouldn't be able to see information about other users unless maybe I'm an admin user. Then I should be able to see everybody's information. Or things like, I'm going to submit a review of a business and I want to make sure that the currently authenticated user, and only that user, is the author of the review. So I don't want another user to be able to submit a review on behalf of another user. I want to make sure that you have to sign in and that's actually you writing that review. So that's what we're going to see today, is how to add those sorts of rules to our GraphQL API with the Neo4j GraphQL library. We'll talk about JSON Web Token, JWTs, which are tokens that allow us basically to identify users and have cryptographic certainty that the user with that token has that identity. We'll talk about Auth0, so being able to add the Auth0 React SDK to our front end, and also how to use Auth0 to handle sign in and generate those JSON Web Tokens for us. And we'll see the really powerful authorization and authentication functionality that is built into the Neo4j GraphQL library. So with that, let's first take a little bit of a review of chapter 7. And then we will, as always in the book club, our goal is to work through the end of chapter exercises and get those done. So we'll get that done today as well.
Sounds good. And yeah,
So,
what I maybe I should explain. What I meant with boring is not that it is not exciting, but it sounds a little bit, after the previous episodes, it sounds, but it's crucial. It's important. It's essential for all of these things. So, but maybe they are not as on the first glance, not as exciting, maybe.
Yeah. We get to leverage the modern marvels of things like public-private key pair cryptography. Like it's amazing. Cool. So chapter 7, and as a reminder, this book, Full Stack GraphQL Applications, is available for free download. You can get the PDF version of that for free. And the link to that is in the video description or in the chat. And
as well. Yep.
Okay, great. So if you haven't downloaded a copy of the book, be sure to do that. You get the full PDF version, and then like Alex said, we are raffling off a signed paper copy that I will send to you. If you just type in ;Raffle if you're watching live now on YouTube.
Exclamation mark.
Twitch.
Exclamation mark Raffle.
Exclamation, not colon. Sorry. Exclamation Raffle.
Yeah. Authentication can be very exciting if it goes wrong. Yes, thank you, Peter.
It's true.
Yeah,
this is true.
Yeah.
Perhaps the wrong kind of excitement.
Yeah, exactly. That's you don't want to get that spike in adrenaline, I guess.
Exactly. So a little overview of the chapter. Like I just said, these are the things we're going to talk about in the chapter. JSON Web Token, the super powerful auth GraphQL schema directive, which is a feature of the Neo4j GraphQL library that allows us to.
Do you want to zoom in a little
define
on this page?
Oh yeah, sure. Zoom in. So the auth GraphQL schema directive allows us to define authorization rules in our GraphQL type definition. So we saw previously how we use things like the Cypher GraphQL schema directive for adding custom logic. We use these GraphQL schema directives to sort of configure the generated GraphQL API powered by the Neo4j GraphQL library. So that's where we're going. The first thing we talk about in the book, and I'll probably skip over this section, is kind of looking at a very naive approach to building some sort of authorization functionality in a GraphQL API. And basically all we do here is in our resolver function, we just have a super simple check that there's a token the value that we're looking for before we return data. And so this is just wanting to point out how we can add authorization headers to the GraphQL request. And we'll see that in a minute, but that's the way that we're passing these JWTs, the JSON Web Token. That's how we're passing those around, is that's included as an authorization header, like right here. So here my token is authorized 1, 2, 3. And then our server application is checking the value of that token. So let's talk about JSON Web Tokens a little bit. So I think the best way to look at this is this site, jwt.io. And this is a site that Auth0 manages, but it explains what JWT is, but really has this really handy tool for encoding and decoding JSON Web Tokens. So fundamentally, a JSON Web Token is just a cryptographically signed JSON payload. So this is the example token that we get on the left here. And if we look here in this payload section, this is the JSON data that is embedded in this token. So anyone can decode and read the claims. The payload is called also the claims of the token, because it's sort of the claims that the user is making. So for example, these are some of the default claims that we'll find. The sub claim, or the subject. This is oftentimes something like a user ID. Sometimes this can be an email address, something to uniquely identify the user. And then some other information about the user. So when the token was issued, when the token expires, the roles that the user has, maybe they're an admin, these sorts of things. And so we can add values to our token here. So maybe we have an email address that we've included, and that is now embedded in this token. So the way that we ensure that this user is indeed John Doe is by signing the token. So when we're passing around these tokens, anyone can read the claims in the token, but we need a special key to sort of validate the token. And so this can be the simplest form, a shared key. So only the GraphQL server application is using a single key to generate and sign these tokens. And then when a GraphQL request comes in, it's using that same key to sort of verify that the token was signed using this key. We're also going to see how to use public-private keys so that we can not have this shared key that we have to pass around. So there's a few different ways to verify a token, but this is the basic idea. So any sort of JSON payload we can embed into a JWT, and then we use that JWT as an authorization header to make authenticated GraphQL requests. That's the basic idea. So that brings us to talking about some of the functionality in the Neo4j GraphQL library, specifically the auth GraphQL schema directive. And so here we're initially setting this up in our API application. We are setting this secret, so that environment variable that we set for JWT secret, that's going to be the secret that we're using to verify any JSON Web Tokens that come in. And then the claims in that token we can reference in the rules that we define for our GraphQL API in the GraphQL schema. So let's take a look at some of these. And so there are a handful of rules that we'll look at. One is authenticated. We'll look at roles. We'll look at allow. We'll look at bind, and we'll look at where. So a few different options depending on what sort of authorization rule we're trying to define. We'll start with the simplest one, which is the is authenticated rule. And so we're going to add that here to the, which field is this? This is, yeah, this is the average stars field. So average stars is a floating point number. So we're just taking the average of the stars, all the reviews for a business. We define that logic using Cypher. We saw also how we could use the built-in aggregations to do this, but we chose to do this using a Cypher schema directive. And then on this field, we also add an auth schema directive. And here we specify the rules. So this is protecting the average stars field. And what rule do we want to apply? Well, we want the user to be authenticated in order to be able to see this field. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the GraphQL request requesting this field must have a valid signed JSON Web Token. We're not looking at any of the value of the claims here, just saying that you need to be authenticated to our application in order to view this field. And the logic for that is, maybe we have like a business search web application, so you can search for business information, but then we want to encourage users to sign up for our app. And so to view information like the average stars, find the best business, you're going to need to sign up for the app as an incentive just to sort of engage with our application. And so here we can see if we request the average stars field and we're not passing a signed JSON Web Token, we get this unauthenticated error message. And so to do that, we need to add the authorization token as a header. And when we do that, then we get the average stars for each business. We can see in our application what this looks like. So here's our simple business reviews application. And we are going, we'll zoom in a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So we've added this login button. So skipping ahead a little bit, we've added the Auth0 SDK, which we'll talk about how this works in a minute. But basic idea is if I click this login button, this now takes me through the Auth0 authentication flow. So I need to sign in. I'll sign in with GitHub. Auth0 is nice because I can use multiple forms of authentication. So I can do the social sign-ons, I can create an account with email and password, that sort of thing. And I don't have to worry about things like how do I handle a password reset for the user? These sorts of things. That's all handled by Auth0, which is quite nice. You'll see Auth0 used
easy to implement. Yeah.
Totally, exactly. And there's a React SDK for Auth0. There's libraries and lots of different frameworks that make it really easy to integrate these features. And Auth0 is used in lots of different applications. Neo4j uses Auth0 for signing into the community site, for signing into Aura, these sorts of things. So now we are authenticated, and we can see here that now, because we're authenticated we're now able to view the average stars for each business. And there's this simple user profile here with my my avatar and my username. If let's go to the network tab. So if I go to developer console, and if I look here in the network tab, let's go through this again. So I want to see the GraphQL request. And we can see here, this is the GraphQL request to render this list. But if we look at the headers, we can see here there's this authorization header. And I'm going to copy this and go back to JWT.io and paste this in. We need to remove this bearer piece. That's not part of our JWT. But now we can see the claims for the payload, the JSON payload that was generated for us by Auth0. So I have the sub claim. This is my GitHub ID. So it's Auth0 uses this format of the sign-in method and then a pipe and some ID. So I can tell that I signed in with GitHub and this is my ID. And then we also have things like when this expires, scopes, if I want to give certain users different scopes for, this is useful for, you have the scope to say, create a review, create a business, these sorts of things that specify the different operations as well. But anyway, this is nice. We can see what Auth0 is basically generating this JWT for us, which we can then use in our API. So I think one way to think of Auth0 is like a JWT provider, or JWT as a service, maybe is a way to think of it. But JWTs are super powerful. Cool. So that is the simplest rule, this idea of is authenticated. The next one is looking at roles. So we can create a rule that's now checking to make sure that, what did we add here? Oh, the user, right. So we said that the user should not be able to view information about other users unless they are an admin. So that's what this auth rule is saying here, where roles is admin. And what that rule is going to do is before data is fetched from the database, we're going to take a look at the roles claim and see if admin is in there. It's not. This user is not an admin, so we're not going to be able to view any user information.
That would be a special flag, I guess, inside the token where it says admin true or something, or user role admin or something like this.
Yeah, it would look very similar to the scope here. So it would be something like this, where we have a roles array and one of them is admin. So, and we can have multiple, we typically have multiple roles. So I'm a user, I'm also an admin, so something like this. Now I can't just add this in to the token and then try to use it because the token is not signed and verified by Auth0. So that I'm going to get a forbidden error if I tried this. The way we talk about this in the book, in the Auth0 section, the way that we add these roles, Auth0 has some logic that we can configure when we set up our Auth0 application. And so I think the thing that we do is we check to see the domain of the email address. So we can write a little function in Auth0 that says if the domain is, I think we said Grand Stack or Neo4j, then we can give you an admin role Otherwise, you just get the user role or no role.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not quite what we want, because I should be able to view my own information, right? Like I need to be able to view my own information, to view my profile or things like that. And so that's where the allow rule comes in. And note that we can also combine these rules. So I've added now this allow rule, and the allow rule, this is the first one that's actually going to check data in the database and compare the value of something in our JSON Web Token to something that's stored in the database. In that case, we're saying so you can either be an admin user, or that's this or logic here when we pass in multiple rules, or the sub claim, the subscriber claim in the JSON Web Token needs to match the user ID value in the database in order to have access to this information. And because I added that to the type rather than just a single field, this applies to any fields on the user type.
Mm-hmm.
And the syntax here, we're saying $JWT.sub. This is how we can access any of the claims in the token.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, makes sense. You must be registered as a user to see yourself, the data about yourself. I mean, if you cannot access somebody else's information, and you cannot access your own information if you are not there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, if you're an admin user, we want to give you access to all users.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a problem with this, though, in that if you're now sort of forcing the client to understand what data it's allowed to ask for. So for example, if we just asked a query like this, like give me all users and give me their name and user ID, that's always going to fail and give us an authorization error unless we're an admin user. So oftentimes what I want to say is like, well, just show me the information I have access to. Just show me my user information without forcing me to add a filter here to filter just for my user. And so that's where the where authorization rule comes in. So with the where rule, this is really cool because it will add a predicate to the generated database query to filter for just information that the user has access to based on the where rule that you've defined. So just by changing the allow to a where, now when we ask for any user information, that's automatically going to be filtered by the user ID of the currently authenticated user. So now I can just say, give me all users and their name and user ID, but instead of an error, because I don't have access to all user information, I have access to my own user information, it's going to give me just the information I have access to, which is quite nice.
And this is also, I mean, in our data set, I guess it doesn't really matter, but if you imagine you have millions of users, it's also a performance question. I mean, if you're, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think, I mean, if it doesn't have to look over all the records that are there, but it has a very specific one it's looking for, it's going to be quicker.
Exactly, yeah. And so you can see here the generated Cypher query includes this where predicate that we're filtering for just this user based on the subclaim. So we'll go right to that user, return that information. And the final authorization rule that we want to talk about is bind. Bind is useful for mutations, and essentially You can think of bind as when we execute a mutation, we're doing a check to make sure that certain conditions are met in order to execute the mutation. And so the example here is if I'm adding a review for a business, I want to be sure that that review node is connected to the currently authenticated user. I don't want to enable some other user to create a review and assign that to another user saying this user added this review. Only want to enable the authenticated user to do that. And so in this case, here's the bind rule, and this is going on the review type. So this is going to apply to creates and updates. And we are going to enforce that the user ID, so this is a nested structure because now we're following a relationship. So we're looking at not a value on the review node, we're looking at a value on the user node connected to this review and making sure that the user ID is the currently authenticated user.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just see an example of adding a new review. Cool, so that's kind of an overview of the authorization functionality in the Neo4j GraphQL library. I'll drop a link to this page in the documentation, which goes over this functionality.
Cool. I think I shared this earlier, but I'll share it again.
Great, thank you. Cool, so the next part of the book talks about Auth0, how to set up Auth0. I think I'll skip over this part and leave this for folks to review on your own. Auth0 is super powerful. You can also use this functionality without using Auth0. That's one of the nice things about using JWT is that's a standard. We can generate our own tokens if we want to implement sign-in flow ourselves. That's perfectly fine. We can use other identity providers. We chose Auth0 with the book because it's very common and has a pretty good getting started experience and has a free version of their cloud service, so we can set all this up without needing to worry about putting in a credit card or anything like that.
Oh, okay.
So we also cover the We also cover the React setup here for implementing the sign-in flow, which we will skip over in order to jump over to the exercises and make sure we can get those done. There's only 2 today, but I think they're a little more involved than our typical exercise. But before we jump into the exercises, should we do the raffle?
Yeah. So let's maybe everybody last few seconds time before I close it today. So if you want to win, go to Twitch or YouTube, or if you're watching it on Twitch and YouTube live now, then type !raffle in chat and you will get a ticket. Yeah, in a few seconds time, I will close the raffle for today, and we will pick a winner, or the bot will pick one for us. So it's all very, very official. So no tampering on my side or on Will's side. It is really random, as random as the bot is. I don't know how it works exactly, but it is random enough so that it is not in any way influenced by us. So it will pick somebody, and then this person will then win the book signed by Will. So Raffle, spelled R-A-F-F-L-E, Marion, sorry, a slight typo. If you retype again, then you'll be in. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I think we have 2 more episodes, right? And we have two more books to give out. So if you don't win today, maybe next episode is what you win. the book. Otherwise, yeah. Another typo, Olivier. Raffle with 2 Fs. Maybe I'll give you a sec. Yeah, let's do. What time is it now? 39. So let's few more seconds. So Olivier, you have another chance to type it in correctly. Yes, here we go, and I should be seeing you exactly. Here you go. The bot has you in. I guess that's good enough. With that, I'll close.
While we're waiting, we have a special visitor who just sneaked out of my closet. This is Jenny Cat. She likes to hide in the closet and come out during my meetings. So we'll let her out of the room. She's bored.
Yeah, and I'll close the entries now. So you can no longer enter the raffle for today, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Obviously, next time, next chance, and I'll pick the winner. And Chris is our winner for today. So Chris, I hope you're still around. I think you are. Congratulations, Chris. If you want it, I'll pick. In chat, I'll send you, or I send my email, so you can reach out to me there and send me your physical address, as well as if you want to dedicate this book to somebody else, and we can continue on email. But yeah, congratulations, Chris.
Cool, great. We will get that book out to you. This book right here is now yours. 2 more chances to win, chapter 8 and chapter 9. So join us next time for your chance to win. Cool, let's get through the exercises here. So this first one says create a new query field called quality businesses that uses a Cypher schema directive to return businesses that have at least 2 reviews each with 4 or more stars. Protect this field using a roles rule and the auth schema directive to require a role of analyst. Create a JWT that includes this role in the claims and use Apollo Studio to query this new quality businesses field. Cool, so this is gonna give us a good picture of how the authorization rules are declared in our GraphQL schema, and then also how we create JSON Web Tokens, how we sign them, and then how we can add that token as a authorization header to make a GraphQL request. Cool, so this will be a good one. So the first thing we need to do, I guess, is write the Cypher query. So let's jump to Neo4j browser. And zoom in a bit. So it was this idea of finding quality businesses for the analyst type. This is maybe not something we want to include for all users, which is why we're going to hide this behind, or say protect this field behind a roles authorization rule. So we said we wanted to find businesses that have reviews. So we'll start off our traversal like this. And we said that we want where all the reviews are greater than 4.0. So we could say something like this. But this is just going to check for at least one path, right? Because in Cypher, we define some graph pattern, and then the database figures out where that path exists in the graph. And we want all reviews, so no bad reviews. So we can't use a where. Instead, what we're going to do is we will collect our review nodes. into an array. So let's turn this and see what we get. And you can see here, if we look in the table view, we're doing, oh, let's return star, not just B. So what we've done is sort of a group by here. So for each business, which is B, we've just grabbed all the reviews of that business into an array. And so now what we need to do is basically filter out any businesses that have less than a 4-star review. So we can use a list predicate here, the all list predicate function, which will allow us to inspect each review where stars greater than 4.0. And if we look in the Cypher cheat sheet, Cypher cheat sheet, and if we look for the list predicates, if we just do a search for any, we can find that in the list predicate section here. So returns true if the predicate is true for all elements. All, oh, I typed any, I meant all. You want to use all, not any. Yeah, I put all here. So return B. Cool, we end up with 4 businesses that all have every review is more than 4 stars. So let's take this Cypher query. So we will copy this. And we'll go now to our index.js for our GraphQL API. We just put everything in one file here. So we're defining our GraphQL type definitions here. And we want to add this now as a query field. So it's going to be a field on the query type called quality businesses. And this is going to give us an array of businesses. And I'm going to make these non-nullable because we'll always get an array. Maybe it'll be an empty array. And we'll always get a business. We won't have any nulls in there. And the logic for this is going to be defined by a Cypher statement, which is right here. It's one we wrote in browser. Let's clean this up a little bit. Cool, so let's save this and we'll restart our GraphQL API. And let's make sure that this field works. Localhost 4000. And let's just query this field. Let's get a little more screen real estate here and zoom in. And what did we call it? Quality businesses? Yeah. And let's bring back the name. So here we should get our 4 businesses that have all 4-star or more than 4-star reviews. Mm-hmm. And that's good. That's what we want. But we don't want just anyone to be able to request this. We want only users with the role analyst to be able to request that. So we're going to go back to our quality businesses field, and we're going to add a auth directive. And now we're going to add some rules. we're going to add a roles rule of analyst. And we'll save that and restart our GraphQL API. And now let's give this a run. And we get this forbidden error. And that's because if we look at the headers that we are sending, we have an old value in there. It's some old token, but that doesn't match. And so we get this forbidden error. So let's go to JWT.io. Let's refresh to get a blank token here. And so we'll take our John Doe token, we'll add roles claim, which is an array. And this user is an analyst. Then we need to sign the token. I'm going to make one change to our GraphQL server code, and that is the setup for our authorization plugin. Zoom in a bit. What we're going to do here, so we were using the JWKS endpoint, which is a way to fetch the public keys from Auth0 for an Auth0 application. And so rather than using a shared secret, which we saw earlier with a token, this is a more secure way of validating and signing tokens. So we're not going to use Auth0 for this example. So I'm going to comment that out. And instead, we're going to use a shared secret, which is this value. This is now going to be our shared secret. So we need to have this secret value in order to generate a token, which I can do by just pasting that value, Control V in here. Mm-hmm. And then we need to save this. It's more secure to use the public-private key pair because then I can distribute the public key to be able to verify a token, but the private key is the key that's needed to generate a token. And so now we're able to use the public key to be able to say, okay, you can validate it, sure, but I'm keeping the private token extra secure. Only really, in this case, only Auth0 knows about what the private key is, because Auth0 is responsible for generating and signing the token. So it just sort of more secure in that it allows us to not have to share this token to be able to validate that it was signed. We can have a different key that's used to just verify the token, not to create the token.
Okay.
So we'll save that and restart our GraphQL API. And now what we're going to do is take this token, copy that, go back to Apollo Studio, and here in our headers, we are going to, let's just delete this one and we'll see how to add a new one. So we're going to add authorization, and then we say bearer, and then after that, paste our token. And now, if we run this again, now we get our 4 businesses. Because
success. Very cool.
We have a valid token, whereas before we didn't. And if we change this token, maybe you don't have a role of analyst, maybe you have a role of, let's say, user. And if we take that token, go back to Apollo Studio and replace that and run it. Now we get that forbidden error again because we just have a role of user, not analyst.
Cool.
Cool. that kind of shows how the different pieces fit together. Number 2, a few minutes, we can get through this one. So in the chapter, we used a GraphQL mutation to create a new business review. We're going to update our React application to include a form to allow currently authenticated user to create new business reviews. Cool. So let's look at that mutation to create a new review. So here it is here. And if we take a look at this, so this is the create reviews mutation, and its input, we are passing the business ID. And let's simplify this a bit. We're just going to submit a numeric value, and let's change this to use variables instead. So mutation, let's call this the add review mutation, and we're going to declare some variables. So the business ID, which is of type ID, we're going to need the user ID, which is also of type ID. And we said we're just going to pass the numeric stars value here. So that's going to be a float. So we'll declare those, and then instead of hard coding the values here, so B10, this is the business ID, stars, we'll replace this. And then the user needs a user ID. Okay, cool. So this is the basic mutation that we're going to use in our React application. So let's switch over there. Before we do that, I'm going to change back to using the Auth0 JWKS endpoint to validate our tokens. And we'll restart our GraphQL API. Oh, I didn't save it, of course. Save it, stop, then restart. Okay, cool. So in our React app now, let's add just over here, maybe just a drop down so we can add a review from this page, sort of the simplest way to go about it. And that is found in the business results React component. And so if we look at the business results component, we're getting all the businesses to appear passed as props from our business search or from the app component. We worked on that last time, if you remember. Then we are pulling in is authenticated from the use auth0 hook. And this is pretty cool. So we saw the concept of hooks earlier, and we saw this with the Apollo client hook, where we sort of inject Apollo client into our React component hierarchy here. And then we can use any of the Apollo client hooks. So like use mutation, use query, are then available to any of our components in our application. And so we do the same setup for Auth0 with an Auth0 provider that has some configuration. And then we inject that into our React component hierarchy. And now we can use this use Auth0 hook, not that file. I want business results. Right here, and here we're getting this is authenticated Boolean, just if the user has gone through the authentication flow. This is what's nice about the Auth0 SDK for React is it's keeping track of all that information. So it's storing in something like local storage our token, and then anytime we make a GraphQL request, adding that token as an authorization header, and we don't have to worry about that. And we get these nice functions for whether or not the user is authenticated, but we can also get the user information this way as well. Cool, so let's add our mutation here. I guess that's the first thing we can do. So this is going to be our add review mutation. Oh, and we need also to bring in the Apollo client hooks here. So we're going to say import use mutation and GQL. So we've already seen the use query hook. Use mutation is very similar. Those come from Apollo client. So we wrap our GraphQL query in this GQL template tag that gives us syntax highlighting and some parsing of the operation, which is nice. So I'm going to copy the mutation that we wrote and paste that in here with our GraphQL variables defined. And so now we can reference the use mutation hook to get some functions to actually execute this. So add review, we also get back data, loading, and error states, just like with the use query hook, although I don't think we'll actually end up using those for our simple example. So we say use mutation hook that we're going to call, and we're going to pass in this add review mutation that we just wrote. Cool, so now we need some sort of form, some sort of select dropdown to show up. So the average stars we're only showing in the case where we are authenticated. So we can do that also for our, let's say submit review, we'll call it. So this is only in the case where we are authenticated. Are we going to show the dropdown? Because of course we have a bind rule. It says we can only submit a review if we are currently authenticated user, and it can only be connected to our user object in the database. So then after, as we're iterating now over each business, so we're going through businesses.map and returning something for each business. That's what populates our table. And so we'll do this after we show our average star. So only in the case where we are authenticated, we are going to render a table or a dropdown. So let's see, this will be a select. Oops. A select, we will add a few things to our select here. What are we going to add? Some options. So value, we'll have 1.0. So we'll go through different options for submitting reviews. So it can be a 1-star. Can be a 2-star. We can do a 3-star. I think we go up to 5. Four-star and one more for a 5-star review. And then the case where we are not authenticated, we just render nothing. Don't show that. Okay, so let's save that. Cool. Now as our form shows up, but it doesn't do anything, of course, we need to add the onChange handler. So the onChange prop, this allows us to define some function that executes when we change the value of one of these drop downs, one of these select options. Mm-hmm. And so this is going to be a function. We're going to pass the event, and the event is what's going to allow us to access the which business was the review is submitted for and what the value of the review is. So what we want to do is execute our add review function, which we got up here as a result from calling this use mutation hook. So calling this add review function is what's going to allow us to execute that mutation that we defined. We just need to pass the values for the GraphQL variables that we defined in our mutation. So the business ID, the stars, and the user ID. Mm-hmm. So we'll pass that in a variables object. So user ID, well, this is going to be user.sub. Where is this coming from? User is coming from here, from auth0, the use auth0 hook. That's this user object. So user.sub is the user ID. We need the business ID. Well, we have this B object. That's each business that we are iterating over. And then we need stars. And stars, this is going to be event.target. So the target of the event is whichever element, in this case, is changing, because we're in the onChange handler, dot value. So that's this value here. But that's a string. We need to convert that to a floating point number. Okay, let's save that. And let's restart, go through again. So we're not authenticated. We don't see the average stars. We don't see the review dropdown. We're going to go through the login flow. And now we see the average stars. And now we see the submit review. So we can submit a review. And we don't have an indication that anything happens. But if we now hit this refetch button, we can see that the average star for fills goes down a little bit. And we can do that the same. Let's rate Mozilla Public Library. Let's give that a 5. And we have to hit refresh, but now we see the average star value is different. So why do we have to hit refetch here? Why don't we just see the average stars update immediately? Well, this has to do with kind of a couple of things. One is the Apollo client cache needs to know that we've updated some values and then to fetch that data again. So we have a few options here for how we want to update that. Apollo client allows us to do things like access the cache directly, or we can trigger a refetch. This refetch button, this just executes the GraphQL query again to load this. So that's a good way to handle that object. So we can think a little bit more about improving the UI here, maybe adding some better feedback, automatically refetching to recompute these, that sort of thing. But that covers, I think, the basic functionality of how to implement the submit review mutation flow, still taking advantage of the authorization functionality. And so even if we went in and tried to submit this mutation directly to the GraphQL API, we would need to have the token for the authenticated user, and we're only going to be allowed to create reviews for that user. Cool, and I think that that was the two exercises that we wanted to get through.
Very cool. Thank you very much, Will. There are a couple of questions, so maybe we can dive into those before we close for today. First one comes from Peter. Peter asks, is Neo4j a good way to store logging info for authentication violations, or just use something simpler like a text file?
Interesting. So authentication violation. So I'm guessing that's going to be something like a user tried to access some resource that they didn't have access to. Yeah, I guess the way I would handle that is to have some logging set up from the GraphQL API application to sort of log those unauthorized requests, and then have some observability tool or some dashboard maybe that I'm parsing the logs and keeping track of that. You could store that in the database and build some sort of tool that queries the database. I guess the issue you run into is if you have multiple instances of your API application running, if you're scaling that horizontally, how do you sort of think of storing that in the database? So I think the typical approach, yeah, would be to use some application logging and then some observability or dashboard framework to view those.
Yeah, makes sense. And then from Joe, a question: why did you provide the user ID in the client mutation payload? Is that not implied in the backend with the AAuth restriction?
Yeah, that's a good one. So that's referring to this mutation where we are creating a review and then connecting it to the user node using this where functionality, so where the user ID matches whatever user ID we're passing. So we have a bind rule in our GraphQL API. So if we look at that, we've created that on the review node. Where did we define that? Business user review. Oh, yeah, here it is. So we have this bind rule that is enforcing this relationship where the user ID matches the claim. So the bind functionality sort of checks this during the course of the mutation. Sort of an equivalent functionality to what you're asking about would be a where rule. So we saw that one for the user by adding this where, excuse me, adding this where rule, we're automatically adding the predicate to only filter for information that this user has access to. So if we request user information, we're going to generate that predicate that fills in matching for the user ID in the database from the JSON Web Token. So we don't have that same sort of rule here on the bind. The bind doesn't add that predicate in the database query generation process. which is why we need to still include that in the mutation. We need to tell it what user ID to match the to connect the review node to, because we use the bind rule. So we don't have that functionality. We have that protected, so we're not going to be able to create a review and connect it to another user node other than the user we're currently authenticated to. So we're protected that way, but we still need to include the value in the mutation. Yeah, good question.
Yep, cool. Makes sense, he says. So I guess that makes sense. Kind of like the user connection and backend. Yeah, got to do the client side, but still have it somewhat restricted. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. Do we have one more time for one more unrelated to auth question, or how's your time looking, Will?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Joe, another question from Joe. He asks, how would you handle subscription to a nested object? I have 3 types: board, column, card. How would I detect changes in any of them in real time? Subs for each type? Question mark.
Yeah, you would. So subscriptions are a relatively new functionality in the Neo4j GraphQL library. And yeah, that's exactly right. You would, if you want to sort of listen for changes on multiple types, I think you would need to create multiple subscriptions. Exactly. Okay. I'll drop a link to, you've probably seen it, but the documentation for subscriptions in the chat as well.
Yeah, cool. Let me quickly get that in the chat. Here you go. Okay. Yeah, I think with that we're at the end of this chapter 7. So thank you very much, Will. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching and for the great exchange on questions at the end. So very good, very nice to see. We will be back with chapter 8 next week. So again, on the Wednesday, so that's already the 25th of January. We will be back same time, same place. In the meantime, Michael and I will be back on Monday, where we discover AuraDB with another fun data set and have some fun there with AuraDB. And on Tuesday, I have an exciting guest, Suleiman Sharif, and we have a Neo4j live session together where we talk about him porting a global GEM graph infrastructure into Neo4j. So that's like a life sciences chemicals session next Tuesday in the evening. So and as usual, all the events you will find at neo4j.com/events. So it would be great to see you join any of these live or on the recordings. And yeah, with that, thank you very much all. Congrats again, Chris, to winning the book. I received your email, so I'll forward that, and you will get the book soon. And yeah, with that, I wish you all a great rest of your week, rest of your day, and take care, everybody, and goodbye. Thank you, Will, again.
Cheers. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Bye.